Welcome to the next webinar in our series on building the supply of high-quality childcare in high-needs areas. We really appreciate you joining us today to talk about using grants and contracts, payment rates, and financial incentives to increase supply and to improve quality. I'm Jen Bender with the BUILD Initiative. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few logistics. Due to the large size of this webinar, all participants are in listen-only mode. We hope it will not limit the interactive nature of this webinar, so we encourage you to put your comments and questions in the chat box found in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We want to hear from you as part of this discussion. You're all experts as well in terms of what has worked and not worked for you, so please do share your experience via the chat box. On our last webinar, we had a great dialogue not only between the participants and the speakers, but also among the participants themselves. So let's keep that going today. I want to turn it over now to Zelda Boyd, the Senior Technical Assistance Specialist with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zelda Boyd with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance, and I would like to just take a moment and remind everyone that the Quality Assurance Center is available to provide technical assistance to states and territories. RTA is focused on three major areas. First, health and standards and licensing regulations. Secondly, we have a focus on the development and enhancement of state quality initiatives, including QRS. And our last area of focus is the enhancement of quality assurance systems with things like technology, data analysis, and research. So our contact information is available at the end of this presentation. If you do have technical assistance needs in these areas, please reach out to us. Now let's take a quick look at our webinar schedule. So today's session, as you can see, we will be focusing on different strategies related to provider payments. And in the June series, which will be our wrap-up for this series, we will be looking at localities that are using creative ways to build and sustain the supply of care in high-need areas. So as part of our webinar series, we've created a web page with a recording for each webinar and any resources that were shared during the webinar and the PowerPoints. They're all located at this link. You can also go to this page to sign up for the June session, which again is the last webinar in this series. So please check out this page and feel free to share it with others that might be interested in this material. So we are so pleased to have with us today Leanne Bryan and Mary Beth Jackson. They're both from the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. Leanne is a Technical Assistance Lead, and Mary Beth is a Senior Technical Assistance Specialist. And they are going to be joined today by partners from the states who will share different strategies related to provider payments, grants and contracts, and financial incentives to help build and sustain the supply of high-quality care. And they'll be focusing on sustaining the quality of care in general, but also specifically in care deserts. So Leanne, I'm going to turn this over to you to introduce the state partners and to get us started.
Thank you, Zelda. So like Zelda said, we welcome our state presenters this afternoon. We have Krista Bell. She's the Director of the Division of Child Care, the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services. We also have Susan Adams. She is from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, as well as Kristen Bernhardt. Susan is the Assistant Commissioner for Pre-K and Instructional Support. And Kristen is the Deputy Commissioner for System Reform. Also here shown on your slide is Jenny Couture. However, I don't believe Jenny is going to be presenting this afternoon, but she certainly may be available to help with any discussion. So now we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is Leanne Bryan, and I'm very happy to be here with you all this afternoon, even if it is virtually, and to help share and explore strategies related to grants and contracts, provider payment rates and financial incentives to build and sustain the supply of quality child care. This is an area that I imagine both CCDF programs and providers are interested in learning a little more about and hopefully sharing your experiences. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into some of the content and background so that we can get to our state presenters and open discussion with all of our attendees. So to start us off here this afternoon, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll. And Jen, I believe I'm going to need you to do that for us. So this one is in relation to grants and contracts. And we would like to hear if your state is currently implementing grants and contracts. So you choose the option that best fits your state currently. Are you offering grants and contracts? Are you offering them but perhaps could improve a little bit on the process? Are you interested in offering grants and contracts but maybe not doing so quite yet? Or is your state currently not offering grants and contracts? All right, so it looks like the majority of you, oh, sorry, I think Mary Beth, you're gonna talk through this. Sorry about that.
Well, Lee, you are welcome to talk through it as well. Hi, everyone. It looks like, based on your responses, the majority of you are offering grants and contracts but could improve the process. Well, that's a perfect response for today's session because we're going to actually have states that are, Georgia's going to let you know how they're doing it, and then we'll give other states opportunities to weigh in on how they're doing it in ways they've been successful. It also looks like about 25% are offering them, and about 4% are interested in offering. So hopefully you'll be able to get some information today to just help you determine if that's a direction you want to go. And then possibly you can reach out to the Quality Assurance Center and Zelda and her team on looking at maybe getting some more examples or more resources. And it looks like 34% are not offering. So maybe for just this session, this purpose of this session alone, this is something you can learn more about and potentially think about offering in the future. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Leanne.
Thank you, Mary Beth. So for that 34% that currently are not offering grants and contracts, this is actually where we're going to start today. So grants and contracts are used by many of the states. There's approximately 25 currently. They're using grants and contracts to increase the supply of quality care, primarily for underserved or those vulnerable populations. Grants and contracts are generally used in conjunction with a voucher or certificate and help to stabilize programs and improve access for the families by purchasing space or slots for a certain number of kiddos. So if we take a look at data primarily from the 2016-2018 CCDF plans, states and territories are using grants and contracts to align the provider's eligibility for a contract with their Quality Rating and Improvement System, or QRIS. So these providers are generally at a higher QRIS level. Lead agencies are conducting needs assessments of targeted demographic groups, geographic areas, and underserved populations. Conducting the needs assessments helps states to understand shortages in their own communities, and then what's the most effective use of direct service grants and contracts. States and territories also use grants and contracts to serve both CCDF and state target populations. So some examples of that might be children who need care during non-traditional hours, children who are English language learners, or maybe children of teen parents. The last bullet on this slide is supporting school-age child care. And I'll give you an example of this one. Nevada contracts with nonprofit agencies, including Boys and Girls Clubs and city or county recreational programs, to provide before and after school and care during school breaks. That was a little bit about grants and contracts. Before turning over to our Georgia presenters, we're going to talk a little bit about provider payment rates and how they can be leveraged to increase the supply of quality child care. CCDF does require states to manage their payment systems in a way that's reflective of how the private pay market purchases their child care services. States can then choose to utilize tiered rates, differential rates, or rate add-ons on top of their base payment rates for targeted populations. So some examples of that might be providers serving children with special needs or school-age programs, and there's certainly a lot of other examples out there. So how are states and territories using payment rates to increase supply? Payment rates may be enhanced for those programs that have achieved national accreditation. So for example, NACI accreditation, National Association on Family Child Care, or National School-Age Child Care Alliance. Those are just a few. An enhanced rate makes higher quality child care slots available to CCDF children whose parents may not otherwise be able to afford this type of care, and to encourage more providers to be eligible to serve our CCDF kids. Lead agencies are also providing tiered or enhanced rates for programs that are participating in and have met certain thresholds within their QRIS. So for example, perhaps a state has 4 levels within their QRIS, and the level 2 providers are reimbursed at a rate that is 10% higher than the base rate. Then the level 3 providers are 20% higher, and the level 4 are reimbursed at a rate that's about 30% higher than the base rate. So you can see the tiers there. States are also providing enhanced rates to increase the number of providers serving children with special needs, infants and toddlers, and other priority populations. A little over 25% of states and territories are offering a rate add-on for providers that offer care during the weekend or other non-traditional hours. And last but not least on this slide, another example of how states are using enhanced rates to increase support for family child care providers and networks. So states are utilizing FCC networks to build supply for priority populations. And again, some examples could be including infants and toddlers, care during those non-traditional hours, children with disabilities. Paired with the financial incentives that we'll learn a little bit about next, states are ensuring a more appropriate payment rate for the family child care providers and higher reimbursement rates for those participating in a QRIS, or again, providing care to one of those priority populations. To encourage some participation in family child care networks, states may wish to consider a higher reimbursement rate for those family child care providers participating in the network and meeting those higher quality standards. Now, to provide some state-specific examples of a couple of these practices, I'd like to welcome Susan Adams and Kristen Bernhardt from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. Susan and Kristen are going to share a little bit about their infant-toddler early language and literacy grants, as well as their quality-rated subsidy grants. Susan, would you like to get started?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Hi, everybody. I work here at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, and I'm going to talk briefly about an initiative, a fairly new initiative we have, focusing on improving the quality of infant and toddler care. and specifically through a grant model. You might wonder why Georgia chose to focus on improving language and literacy in infant and toddler classrooms. Often for infant toddler classrooms, we focus on thinking about improving the relationships, thinking about responsive caregiving, thinking about physical plant, and all those things are the core of what is important for high-quality infant and toddler care. But to be quite honest, they're not very sellable, and they're not as realistic to some people who don't live in that world. We've really tried to think about how do we elevate the work of our infant and toddler teachers and really validate the work they do. And one way we do that is to connect it to other widespread initiatives in the state. We have a governor that is very focused in Georgia on third grade reading, and we have a very large grade level reading campaign. We have a lot of focus on early literacy in the state, and that's why we had the opportunity through our Governor's Office of Student Achievement to look at investing in improving language and literacy in infant and toddler classrooms. Now, what I'll tell you is it's all those good things that we think about when we think about improving infant and toddler care. We're focusing on responsive caregiving, focusing on primary relationships, thinking about building language. But it's a little sexier to people who don't live in the infant and toddler world to think about it through a language and literacy lens. So what are we specifically doing in these grants? This is a grant process, and actually providers, right now it is just focused on child care learning centers. We are in the process of developing a model for family providers, but we don't have that yet. It's about supporting those programs' internal capacity to improve their infant and toddler care. So these are classroom level grants. Programs apply to the department. To be eligible to apply for a grant, you must be at the highest two levels of our quality rated and improvement system. So we're looking at higher quality programs. And they must be in specific counties. So we've looked at which of our counties would benefit from the most from this opportunity. And then also connected it to other initiatives like areas that might have a turnaround school or a school where children aren't meeting their third grade reading benchmarks. What DCAL does is we funded in these classrooms a grant for professional development. Programs receive those funds directly to them. Right now it's $20,000 per classroom, but they're required to attend a pretty intensive professional development training program. The key component of this is programs must identify a current infant or toddler teacher to be a teacher leader in their program, and we provide on-site coaching by a agency infant and toddler specialist. So our specialists are coaching their internal teacher leader to coach and improve the quality of their infant and toddler classrooms. The funds that they receive from their classroom grant must be used to fund the salary for that teacher leader there at their program. And that has been a really attractive part of the program. With these grants, they're fairly new, but they've been really successful. Part of that is we've really looked at what kind of data that we could collect in these classrooms so that we would have the data we knew to prove our case for scale up. So we, in these classrooms, have been conducting class observations and using those. We're also using the LENA in this project. And I don't know if you're familiar with LENA, but LENA is a recording device that records conversational turns within programs. We're using those reports for feedback. We're also going to be conducting interviews and surveys with the participants, and then we, of course, have our TA plan and visit notes. We also are conducting a pretty widespread evaluation with our office, Governor's Office of Student Achievement, and with Child Trends. So we'll have lots of information to share with states about the effectiveness of this program. We did have a question about whether this was a model for the Race to the Top. This is actually funded through our state dollars right now. We do have enough data at this point that next year we have been funded to double the program. So we'll go from 15 classrooms to 100 classrooms next calendar year. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, and she's going to talk about subsidy grants.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. And to expand on the last question, the grant program that Susan was just talking about is a professional development grant. It does not fund slots for children, so it is not an access strategy, but it is a powerful quality improvement strategy that is a great thing to think about how you layer over an access strategy. As you heard, the reason for using grants and contracts, it can be to perform a variety of functions to improve the stability and supply of quality childcare. So the grant program you just heard about was around one of the strategies we use here at DeKalb to improve quality, not to fund slots in a program. So what I'm going to talk about, though, is our strategy to fund actual slots within a high-quality child care program. And in Georgia, we chose a grant model to do that. Of course, the CCDBG Act and CCDF rule prioritize the quality and availability of infant and toddler care, and so we developed this grant model as a strategy for the state to increase the quality of and supply of and access to child care slots for young children from birth through pre-K entry. The goals of our quality-rated subsidy grants were sort of fourfold. First, to improve access to high-quality early care and education programs for low-income families. Second, to reimburse providers at a rate that more closely supports the true cost of high-quality care. 3, to create a predictable and stable subsidy funding model for child care providers. And 4, to finally create an opportunity for what we hope would be closer relationships between child care providers and families through bringing eligibility on-site to child care programs. I think if you're not doing subsidy grants or contracts yet, it can be kind of overwhelming to think about where do we start. We've been told this is something we should be looking at, but it seems so overwhelming. And in Georgia, this has taken us several years of various iterations to find a model that works for us. We've been piloting various forms of subsidy grant models since 2015 with Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge dollars. And while the model has kind of been tweaked and we've changed little bits and pieces here and there over the years, 3 things have been constant throughout our iterations. First is that child care programs were awarded non-portable slots. Second, that eligibility was determined at the child care program site by program staff in accordance with state child care subsidy policy. And 3 was that monthly rosters determined monthly payments. We began in 2015 with 33 providers and 500 slots serving children from birth through age 3, really thinking about that infant and early toddler capacity. In January of 2018, we switched to being funded by CCDF and expanded to 1,500 slots with a focus on birth through pre-K eligibility. Our next expansion will take place this summer in July of 2018, and we plan to expand to 2,500 children receiving child care subsidy in a state-funded subsidy grant slot. This represents about 5% of all children receiving child care subsidy in the state, and our long-term plan is to bring that number closer to 20%. So what does our current model look like? Well, as I mentioned, right now we're looking at families who have children from birth to pre-K eligibility and who meet our other eligibility criteria for child care subsidy in the state. For child care programs, we're looking for those that have the higher ratings in our QRIS, which is called quality rated, and it's a 3-star system in Georgia. So 2 or 3 stars are on the higher end of our QRIS system. We want programs to have a license capacity of 50 or more, and have a Georgia's pre-K classroom, which is our lottery-funded pre-K program that serves 60% of all 4-year-olds in the state. We think this is important for continuity of care and creating a seamless model for children and families. We want to make sure the programs that apply for this grant already serve families who receive child care subsidy, and we have a list of targeted counties where we look at data such as poverty, maternal education, third-grade level reading rates, low birth weight, homelessness, and dual language learner populations to determine which counties in Georgia we make eligible for this program. We also have a competitive application where we ask programs how they plan to use the additional funding they receive. And while the rate might look low depending on where you are in Georgia, this is actually considerably more than programs can receive even through our tiered reimbursement model. Through a regular CAP certificate, programs can already receive a 5, 10, or 25% bonus payment on top of the base rate repay. But sadly, even with those bonuses, that still puts us well below the 50th percentile for the market rate of child care in Georgia. Our grant model pays closer to the 75th percentile, so this is a considerable financial bonus for programs. A critical piece for this is that programs are held harmless for 2 months from the start date of the grant to allow time for recruitment. We know this needs to be a gradual process so that we don't have a turnover situation in child care programs, and that also they may not charge or assess any additional fees to families. There is no family copay or fee. There is no quality differential for these slots. So what do we know about how these are working? We did commission a study with Child Trends in May of 2017. The link that's on your screen is on our DECAL website, and you can read the full report. It is a qualitative evaluation that looked primarily at what was the experience of providers in administering these grants and were we achieving our goals with them. I really encourage you to read the report if subsidy grants or contracts are something your state is considering or already playing with, because we were really excited to see that overall we were achieving the goals we had set out for with the quality rated subsidy grants. The evaluation found that parent engagement was a cornerstone of what was happening in these programs, that the main reason providers were applying for this opportunity was the opportunity to help families. We did hear from providers that they had multiple challenges working with on-site eligibility, but it was also interesting to read in this evaluation that providers really found interesting solutions for some of the challenges, like making laptops available at their center to families without internet access at home so they could find their pay stubs and pull documentation. I think this is a great opportunity to really think about how you can deepen family engagement at the program. Finally, the remaining 2 findings from that evaluation saw that providers were using grant resources to support the quality of their child care program, whether this was purchasing additional materials, developmental screening tools, books, playground equipment, or teacher training. Some programs even talked about using the additional funds to fund increases in teacher pay so they could hire or retain teachers who got an advanced credential or pay for benefits like health insurance for their staff. Overall, providers reported multiple improvements in the quality of their child care program. We're excited about the additional evaluation we're currently planning for the current rounds of grantees and think that we'll continue to have great data to support this model as a way to deliver child care subsidy in our state. Going into this, though, things I wish I had known. I would be thinking more deeply about some of these factors. It's planning for a subsidy grant or contract model. Administrative capacity, both to determine eligibility as well as to submit roster payments. Thinking about the training for your staff who are going to be monitoring these grants and what do they need to be trained on to kind of switch the way they do their work to ensure that we're meeting federal guidelines, as well as training for the child care programs who are determining eligibility, what they really need to be able to do this successfully. What are going to be your protocols for monitoring? How do you strike that balance between TA and monitoring work? Financial stability and sustainability. If you pick a payment rate for these grants that is not sustainable, how will that impact your relationship with providers in the following year when you might be changing your payment rates? And think intentionally about what additional quality standards you might want to require above and beyond star rating. In Georgia, we've required additional lower ratios and paid planning time for teachers in programs that administer these grants. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to think even more creatively about what that looks like. So it looks like we've had one question come through about why did we choose license capacity of 50 or more. that was because, as you heard, we wanted them to already have a pre-K classroom, which is 22, and we knew we needed to be able to award at least 10 slots to a program in order to make it almost worth our time to go out to do the monitoring and training for this. A license capacity of 50 ensured that we would have a program with those sort of size constraints that would make it worthwhile. We have one other question come in about the change in ratio requirements, and it was essentially dropping one child from our infant, toddler, and early preschool age classrooms. We do offer these grants to Early Head Start Child Care Partnership grantees. DECAL, our state agency, is an Early Head Start Partnership grantee ourselves, and we've made these grant opportunities available to all Early Head Start Child Care Partnership grantees in the state. I think we are one of the first to figure those out. It definitely is a little bit different than what we offer to child care programs individually, but yes, we do offer these grants to all Early Head Start Child Care partners in the state. Our monthly monitoring is done by a staff of Subsidy analysts. These are a team that work for me here at the department that are staffed statewide. They go out and look at the individual case files and have a monitoring protocol to make sure that programs are successfully administering the grant requirements, which include doing that on-site eligibility determination. Our grant program is specific to child care centers. At this time, we don't have a great way to do it for family providers, though we are doing it with family providers who are part of our state's Early Head Start Child Care Partnership model. In Georgia, the Department of Early Care and Learning, we are the only Early Head Start Partnership grantee that incorporates family child care. So we're using that kind of as our pilot, but we know it's going to need more of a hub model than what we have the capacity to do statewide for everyone else without those additional Early Head Start resources. But we're looking forward to hopefully expanding that opportunity. Georgia is a very executive level heavy state, which means that our commissioner and our board that is appointed by the governor have a lot of authority to determine how our CCDF dollars are spent. It did not require legislative action or approval in order to move towards this grant model. I'm just reading through the other questions that we have. The lowest and highest teacher qualifications within the program. Our QRIS is a points-based system, which means programs earn points when they have additional certifications and qualifications for their teachers that go above and beyond. But there's not necessarily a minimum cutoff score in order to be a 1, 2, or 3 star. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but if you have specific questions about how programs earn points in our QRIS for teacher qualifications, we have our quality rated program manual online at qualityrated.decal.ga.gov. The program, as I mentioned, in Georgia, we are an executive-heavy state, so the program is administered through our agency. It was created through DECAL. It is administered through DECAL, and that is how we plan to have it continue. The final question looks like is coming in before I know we need to continue with the webinar is the question around the basis for a decision to have child care providers determine eligibility. We looked at several different models, but we really appreciate the family friendliness of this model. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to have to deal with someone who is working in an office in Atlanta when you're in rural South Georgia, or to submit documentation online, or even that we knew we're not reaching all families with our child care subsidy program, and that child care providers who are in and of the community might be best positioned to reach those demographics and families that we weren't reaching through just hope you can find the application and can get through it. So it was really a decision around how could we implement a family-friendly program. And we've also really enjoyed hearing from providers about how they've gotten to know their families better. I think they thought they knew what their families were going through, and when they really saw the documentation about the situation, some of the people they were working with, they felt really differently towards them and really began to change the way some of the supports in their program were structured. So I think it's been a good decision for Georgia.
The other thing I would just add is that since all of these providers offer our Georgia pre-K program, and many of them also offer our pre-K summer transition program, eligibility is done on site by providers for both of those programs. So these providers, in addition to being a highly rated program, also have demonstrated a large amount of administrative capacity because they're already administering at least one other grant-funded program that requires on-site eligibility to be done.
Great. Well, it looks like we powered through those final questions. We'll make sure that everyone has our contact information as well if you have any follow-up questions about our grant programs.
All right. Thank you, Susan and Kristen. And thank you to all the participants for asking some great questions of our presenters. Zelda went ahead and entered into the chat, so please continue to enter your questions for Georgia. And we'll get to them a little later on in the session when we have more open discussion and time for more questions and answers of both our presenters and the technical assistance staff. So to get us warmed up for Kentucky and their state presentation, I'd like to go back to tiered reimbursements for just a moment and share this graphic on the types of tiered rates that states have implemented, along with a percentage for each type. So these, of course, are approximates, but about 75% or 42 lead agencies use tiered rates for programs meeting higher quality. 50% use tiered rates for programs serving children with special needs. 15 states and territories, or 27%, use tiered rates for care during non-traditional hours. 21% for infants and toddlers. 16% mentioned other reasons for utilizing rate add-ons. And a couple things that we saw there were including or providers that have taken a certain number of training hours annually. So then as reimbursement or incentive for that training, receiving some tiered reimbursement. And paying for registration fees is another one that we saw a few different times under the other category. And then finally, 7% of states and territories offer tiered reimbursements to programs serving homeless children. So we just wanted to share a little bit of data there for everyone related to tiered reimbursements. And now our final supply building strategy is the use of financial incentives. The CCDF final rule requires lead agencies, at the extent practicable, to provide financial incentives and other supports that are designed to expand the full diversity of child care options and help child care providers improve the quality of services. So you can see on this slide a variety of strategies that states are utilizing to invest in high-quality care. We already talked a little bit about the tiered payment rates, and that too is a financial strategy. But here we can see several other options, again, that states are utilizing. So just to pick out a few, providers may need startup or one-time funds to invest in quality, or maybe even to help them move from being a friend or neighbor provider to becoming a licensed family child care provider. Through their QRIS, states may offer quality awards or bonuses when the program achieves a specified rating. Or maybe improvement grants for indoor or outdoor learning environments. That was just to name a couple, and we'd like to hear from you all as well, but lead agencies can direct bonuses and grants to providers in areas that lack a supply of high-quality care. So before hearing from Kentucky and learning about their financial incentives, we would like to take a few minutes and give all of you an opportunity to share your practices with the group. So using the chat box there in the center of the screen, if you could share what types of financial incentives your state offers to build supply. And we'll take just a couple minutes to talk through some of those. One question I see here in the pod is a startup funding. What is startup funding? So that might be funding that's available for a program to enter into and begin participation in a state's QRIS program. So I see a couple responses coming in. Tiered reimbursement rates for higher quality. Wage supplements and scholarships for early childhood education, and that's cut off for me. Jen, I see. For ECE workforce. Some of these I can't see entirely, Jen, but I will share what I can. Tiered reimbursement for special needs and odd-hour care. Yep, so we heard there's quite a few states that offer those non-traditional reimbursements. Higher special needs rates, rates for those that are higher in quality, special rates for parents, and then I can't read the rest. Bonus payments, that's one that we heard over and over again, was bonus payments for providers or educators. Facility improvement grants, training dollars for family child care providers. Jen, I apologize that I don't know the answer to this, but can all of our attendees see what their fellow attendees are typing?
Not for the poll answers, no.
Okay. So there's definitely a variety of different strategies that states are using to use those financial incentives. So thank you everyone for participating in that. And now we're going to turn it over to Kentucky's Krista Bell. Krista's the Director of the Division of Child Care and will talk to us about the use of grants and financial incentives to increase supply and improve quality. Krista?
Thank you very much. I'm very excited for the opportunity to talk about what Kentucky has been able to do by utilizing financial incentives to improve access to quality. We are currently using 4 different funding streams to improve quality and provide support to child care providers. Obviously, we use our CCDF federal funding and state general funds, and these 2 funding streams are primarily used to fund our subsidy per diems and the quality add-ons, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute. And then we are also utilizing Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement funding and Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant funding in order to provide financial incentives through our quality rating and improvement system. And these financial incentives are greater for providers who serve children in our subsidy program. Kentucky was very fortunate to be a recipient of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, and we've used this fund to develop a new quality rating and improvement system in Kentucky, which I will talk a little bit about today, and also to use those funds to provide non-monetary incentives as a boost to move providers to the higher quality. We are very close at this time to exhausting our Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant funds, and so we have had to switch over our funding just within the last 2 weeks to something that's more sustainable in order to continue to support quality in Kentucky. Some of the quality add-ons that we are utilizing in Kentucky through our subsidy program are for providers who have demonstrated higher quality through accreditation. We do provide an additional $2 per day above the maximum subsidy rate for each child for providers who are accredited through NACE, through the National Early Childhood Program Accreditation, the National Association for Family Child Care, or the Council on Accreditation. Those are the 4 accrediting bodies that are listed specifically in our regulation that underlies our subsidy program. But But in addition to that, a provider or another accrediting body could seek approval through our Early Childhood Advisory Council for their accrediting body to be approved for quality add-ons as well. That doesn't happen frequently, but we do provide that flexibility in our regulation to consider other accrediting bodies other than the 4 that are specifically listed. We also provide a quality add-on to providers who provide care during non-traditional hours, so between the hours of 7 p.m. and 5 a.m. daily, or on the weekends after Friday at 7 p.m. and before Monday at 5 a.m. Those providers do receive an additional $1 per day above the maximum rate per child. And finally, providers who care for children with a special need receive an additional $1 per day above the maximum rate as well. So during the first quarter of this calendar year, January through March 2018, 3,557 children were served by accredited providers and received those quality add-on dollars. 4,873 children were served during non-traditional hours, and 227 children with special needs were served by providers who then received those quality add-on incentives. And just to give you an idea of how that compares as a percentage to our total population served, the average total enrollment in our Child Care Assistance Program during the same quarter was 28,283 children. I wanted to talk a little bit about our efforts through the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. We are wrapping up our efforts under this grant initiative, but one of the major things that we've been able to do with this initiative is to develop a new quality rating and improvement system. We moved from a 4-level block system to a 5-level hybrid system that is called Kentucky All-Stars. The lowest 2 levels in our new system are still blocks with specific requirements, but the higher level, high quality levels, levels 3 through 5, are a point system, which gives providers greater flexibility in how they accumulate points to demonstrate quality. When we first started bringing providers into this system, we were quickly able to identify the areas where they were encountering challenges in being able to move to the high quality levels, and that really helped to focus our efforts in terms of the type of non-monetary incentives that we wanted to support with this grant funding. And so this slide shows the 4 major areas in which we invested in non-monetary incentives to help providers to move to higher quality. We were able to provide 467 providers with developmental screeners, and so these are providers who weren't previously utilizing any type of developmental screener in their classrooms. And so they were provided with screening tools and the associated professional development to be able to use those appropriately. There were 471 providers who were supplied with curriculum and assessment tools. And when we first started bringing providers into the new quality rating and improvement system, the lack of curriculum and the associated assessment tools was by far what we observed the largest barrier in order to be able to move to beyond a level 2 to the higher quality levels. So this is an effort that we have really focused on over the last 12 to 18 months to be able to give providers access to those types of resources and also to the professional development that's needed in order to be able to effectively utilize those in the classroom. We additionally provided 1,663 providers with classroom learning materials, and those directly related to the standards and were provided as a support to be able to obtain a higher score on their environmental rating scales, which relates to their ability to move to the higher quality levels. And 5,081 child care staff members were provided no-cost professional development in 461 separate training sessions. And all of these sessions related to the quality standards within our QRIS. I have broken down for each one of these the financial investment to support each one of those initiatives. I know often when I go to meetings with other states and hear great ideas of what other states are doing, it can be frustrating sometimes when you come across a really great idea but you don't have access to similar funding to be able to replicate those efforts. So I thought it was really important to demonstrate the amount of funding for each one, and what I will say is some of these efforts that I feel have had the greatest impact are not the ones that came with the higher price tag. So I think that that is really important to remember. Certainly the curriculum and assessment and the associated professional development probably have been the most impactful in terms of being able to move providers to higher quality levels that is sustainable. And just again, to give you perspective in terms of what percentage of providers were able to benefit from this initiative, Kentucky has a total of approximately 2,100 licensed providers. So you can see that a fairly large percentage of providers were reached through this effort. As for the impact on quality, just as an example of the 471 providers who were supplied with curriculum and assessment tools and the no-cost professional development on how to implement those, 74% of those are now at the high-quality levels of 3 through 5 in Kentucky All-Stars. As a comparison to our previous QRIS system, there were 264 providers who were a level 3 or greater in Stars for Kids Now, which is our old quality rating and improvement system, and now there are 1,012 providers that are level 3 or greater in All Stars. Now what I will say is we're not comparing apples to apples because they're two completely different quality rating and improvement systems, but it's still impactful to look at the difference in the numbers and also in terms of the percentage of providers in Kentucky that we've been able to reach and support to move to the high quality levels. As I stated previously, we are nearing the end of our grant initiative with All-Stars, and so we have recently filed our regulation to make All-Stars our permanent quality rating and improvement system in Kentucky. In doing so, we have switched from using the grant funding for financial incentives, and now we are using our Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement dollars to support those financial incentives for providers who participate in our QRIS. The chart that is displayed here shows the initial achievement awards for providers in our QRIS, and this is for licensed providers. I didn't want to inundate participants with a number of different charts, but this looks really similar for our family child care home and providers as well. The difference between the Type 1 licensed child care providers in Kentucky, the initial achievement awards, than those for family child care home providers, as the initial ranges for family child care home providers are half at each level. So for levels 2 through 5, licensed child care providers receive between $500 to $5,000. Family child care home providers for each corresponding level receive half of the initial award. We also provide annual quality awards. So each year we ask providers to provide documentation to demonstrate that they are sustaining that same level of quality through an annual quality review process. And once that they complete that process, they do receive a monetary incentive for doing so. For licensed providers, this ranges from $300 at a level 2 to $3,000 at a level 5. And again, just like with the initial achievement awards, the annual quality awards for family child care home providers are half of those amounts. And finally, we do provide subsidy enrollment awards. These are calculated and paid to the provider annually based on the average number of children served per month multiplied by the months of operation. So for example, if a provider has a program that runs only through the school year, then that would be calculated by 9 months as opposed to 12 months. And this is only paid to our high quality providers, levels levels 3 to 5 in our All-Stars quality rating and improvement system. I wanted to talk a little bit more about our Subsidy Enrollment Awards, and I know that there is a lot going on this slide with the two charts side by side, but I wanted to show the comparison of how we incentivize high-quality providers to serve children in the subsidy program in the old QRIS system, Stars for Kids Now, as compared to how we're doing this in the new QRIS Kentucky All-Stars. These charts show the Subsidy Enrollment Awards for both licensed centers and family child care homes. The first difference you'll likely notice is that the new system is far less complicated. We had previously paid a higher incentive based on percentage of subsidy children served, but there's no evidence to support that children are better served in centers with a higher concentration of subsidy children. Therefore, we've moved away from these more complicated calculations and pay subsidy enrollment awards now based only on the quality level and the number of children served. Second, we now pay subsidy enrollment awards only to centers at the high quality levels 3 to 5. We specifically wanted to increase access to high quality early care and education settings for children served through our CCAP program, our Child Care Assistance Program. Therefore, those are the only programs who now receive these awards. When we filed our regulations recently to make Kentucky All-Stars our permanent QRS in Kentucky, we thought that we would receive a lot of public comment about the fact that we had dropped level 2 from the centers who could receive subsidy enrollment awards, but in fact we did not receive any comments, and so we feel like this is a shared philosophy and well accepted. And finally, you'll notice that the amount of the award has significantly increased with Kentucky All-Stars. Again, I think this demonstrates our commitment to incentivize access to high-quality care for children in our subsidy program. The lowest amount a licensed provider could be paid as an award for a child under 3 in the new program is $25 per month per child, and the highest amount is now $45 per month per child. Under the old QRIS system, a provider could have been paid between $12 and $19 per month per child, so the amount of the awards have more than doubled under the new system. In April 2016, there were 157 providers at the high quality levels with subsidy children enrolled in Stars for Kids Now, and today there are 711 providers at high quality levels 3 through 5 with subsidy children enrolled. So you can tell that our efforts to improve access to quality have been effective, increasing from 157 providers to 711 providers at high quality levels who are serving children in the subsidy program. Before implementing our new quality rating and improvement system, there was a pilot, and we are currently in the midst of a validation study which will be available later this year. And so we are anxious to see the results of that, but we have gone ahead and filed our regulation to make All-Stars our permanent system in Kentucky. And I see a number of questions, so I will try to move through these.
Krista, it might help you right after there's a question about the homelessness. That's when your presentation started. So I don't know if that will help you. The question was, have you given any thought to an add-on for providers that support homelessness, potentially saving a spot for a homeless child to be enrolled immediately per the need in the community?
Okay, I see a question about how do you determine whether a child has special needs. The definition of special needs is a child with multiple or significant impacts to functioning that require ongoing specialized care. So that is the definition that we're using in Kentucky. Do they have to have an IEP or IFSP, or can other documentation of therapy services be provided? They do not have to have an IEP or IFSP, but of course that would be common given the definition. But any type of documentation that meets the definition that I just provided would suffice. The rest of that question was, does the center or family provide that information? It could be either. And then I see a question about, did Kentucky specify which curriculum and child assessment tool programs needed to use? We do have a list in terms of documenting whether providers meet our standards for our All-Stars QRIS. There are a number of different curricula and assessments that are acceptable. However, for the purpose of what we could fund for the grant, we did pick creative curriculum and the high scope and the corresponding assessments that go with those, just simply because this made it a little bit simpler for our procurement process to focus on two that seem to be most widely used already in Kentucky and most in demand. But in terms of meeting the standards for our QRIS, there are others that are acceptable, but those are the ones that we funded through the grant. The next question is, what are the caseloads for your quality coaches who work with your 2,100 providers? Our coaches are spread out across 8 child care regions in the state that is supported through our Child Care Aware network of services. And so because the number of providers varies quite a bit from region to region, it does vary from coach to coach. And then I see a question about, could participants receive each of the non-monetary options, or were they limited to choose one? Yes, participants could receive each of the non-monetary options. They were not limited. So all 4 of the non-monetary options that I discussed were available to every provider, potentially based on need. We did have providers, especially for the classroom materials, they completed a needs assessment that identified the types of needs that they had, and then orders for classroom materials were developed based on that self-report. But providers potentially, if they were in need of those supports to move to the high quality levels, could take advantage of any of those types of non-monetary incentives. I see another question about how Kentucky had providers apply for or indicate interest in receiving non-monetary incentives and how they were delivered to them. So we did use our network of coaches across the state, quality coaches, to ascertain what providers needed in terms of additional support to be able to move to the higher quality levels. And those supports were provided based on the reported need. I see another question about, does the All-Stars program require a site to receive a minimum percentage of subsidy to receive grants and awards? No, it does not. There are financial incentives available to programs who do not participate in our subsidy program. The subsidy program the Quality Rating and Improvement System in Kentucky now is mandatory for any provider who is receiving public funds, whether that is through CCDF or the food program. Any provider receiving any type of public fund is a mandated participant in our QRIS, but providers who don't receive public funds can participate voluntarily. We have had very few programs opt out of our QRIS, so the participation rate is very high even for programs that do not receive public funds. But there is not a requirement. There are still financial incentives, but obviously through the Subsidy Enrollment Award, the financial incentives are greater for programs who do participate in the subsidy program. Are those increased incentives based on market rates, or how were those amounts determined? So they are not at this time based on market rates. Kentucky actually just received its most recent market rate study, so we are currently in the process of digesting that information. So I will say the timeline was a little bit off for that, for us to consider the market rate in terms of the subsidy incentives. When we were developing our new incentives, we did start from the old incentive program with Stars for Kids Now, and that it sort of evolved into a structure that we feel like is better and better incentivizes supporting access to quality for children in our subsidy program, and that really was our, I guess, main guiding principle in setting the new subsidy amounts, is structuring that in such a way that it did provide increased access to quality programs for children in our subsidy program. And this last, I see another question. It says, I understand that you do not contract directly with early Head Start providers where 25% minimum subsidy is required. Are you considering this for predictable funding can be relied upon? And I'm not sure if that is a question for Kentucky or if that was a question for Georgia. I will go ahead and answer it for Kentucky just in case it is for Kentucky, but that is not something that is currently under consideration. We may make changes to our quality rating improvement system and our financial incentives as a result of our validation study later this year, but that is not a change that we're currently considering.
And for Georgia, yes, we do contract directly with Early Head Start Child Care Partnership providers. Every Early Head Start Child Care Partnership provider in Georgia has a grant for child care subsidy funds.
So Leanne, I think we do have a few other questions in the chat box. I think these were questions for Georgia early on. We had one question, is the child trend study you mentioned publicly available yet?
Yes, the child trend study on the quality rated subsidy grants is posted and available on our website. The link was on the slide. For the evaluation we're currently conducting on our early language and literacy grants, it is not available yet. But it would also be posted on the same research and evaluation page that the subsidy grant evaluation is posted on.
Okay, great. And then we had another question, is monthly monitoring required for the providers? And I think that question was for Georgia.
Yes, so for us, yes, they do get monthly monitoring, but honestly I would say in those first months, it's more often than that, and it's much more technical assistance. So it's providers are calling with questions about how do I do X, Y, Z, and my analysts are out there making in-person visits to walk them through how to handle all those situations. So yes, we would love to be on a monthly monitoring schedule, but it is definitely a lot more of technical assistance, on-site coaching through the implementation of the subsidy grant model, just on the eligibility side.
Great. And then there was a question, how many providers are you currently working with? And you stated that a concern was the administrative capacity for the providers. Is this a large barrier? And what have you implemented to support this?
Right now we're at just under 60 providers, so it's our largest group yet, but still a fairly small one where we know the names and faces of who we're working with. Yes, administrative capacity is a huge hurdle to successfully administering these grants. I think in our early applications we were really focused on the quality and what you were doing focus on the classroom quality and what providers were doing to support their teachers, to create positive learning environments and those types of things. I think now that we're going into it, obviously those pieces are still critically important, but we're now also much more interested in what systems do you have in place around program administration for us to know that you're going to be successful, and not just in your pre-K classroom, but throughout your entire program operations. So one of the things that we'll be implementing as a screener going into our application process for our expansion for July will actually be on-site visits before we award funding to get an idea for what the systems look like that are in place. That will be a huge, I think, benefit for us, not necessarily to disqualify anyone from receiving funding, but just to have an idea of what level of support they're going to need to get this grant off the ground. The paperwork around eligibility determination and just keeping accurate files on children to survive any audit from our office is a lot. And if programs have never been familiar with that level of eligibility determination, it can be a heavy lift for them. So program administration is definitely a barrier, but we're right now looking at providing all of the on-site support we can to help develop those systems that lead to success, and adding in that pre-selection site visit to assess program administrative capacity prior to awarding grant funds.
Okay, I think we had one last question. Have you given any thought to an add-on for providers that support homelessness?
So for us in Georgia, we have not given an add-on to providers that support homelessness, but that if a program does have a close relationship, let's say with a homeless shelter, or has a strong referral relationship with other family supporting organizations, those are all things that would give them competitive priority points for quality rated subsidy grants, which, as I mentioned, are a substantial add-on on top of our base rates.
And I'll answer that for Kentucky as well. We do not currently provide a quality add-on for providers that support homelessness, but I do think that that's a wonderful idea, and certainly something for consideration the next time that those administrative regulations are opened.
Great. And I think we just had one final question, and I'm not sure. I think Leanne and Mary Beth, this question may have been toward you all. Also, we do not understand what is additional number of absences for subsidy children based on quality rating level.
Yep, this is Leanne from the Subsidy Center. I can answer that one. So some states limit the number of absences that a CCDF child can have in a particular time period. Generally, it's within a month. And once the child exceeds that number, the parent is responsible for paying the provider for the absent day. So some states are using financial incentives to help increase the number of absences for those subsidy kids.
Great, thank you. I think we have answered all the questions in the chat box. And what we'd like to do now is, Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you to do our poll, evaluation poll.
Okay.
And while Jen is pulling that up, I just want to remind everyone that you can go out to the landing page to pick up the link and sign up for next month's webinar. And please hang on and complete the evaluation for us. And thanks for attending today's webinar.
This webinar series is funded by the Office of Child Care and the Office of Head Start, and they're evaluating the usefulness of each webinar. So if you wouldn't mind just hanging out a few more minutes, we just have 3 short questions. We'd really appreciate your feedback so that we can improve. We're going to move on to the next question. This is the second question. There's just one more after this. And the last question. And thank you once again to our presenters, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Everyone will get a copy of the PowerPoint and the recording following the webinar, and there's also a link to the website where you can register for the last session in this series. Thank you.